Hello, today I will be showing you a review of the Asus Vivobook Pro laptop I have been using for about 5 months. It's an Asus Vivobook Pro 15 model that has the famous OLED screen. It's an AMD model. It's not necessarily top of the line model in terms of specifications, but I think it handles quite well some tasks. And besides some benchmarks I will be showing, and they are not going to be very extensive, I will be also presenting to you how this laptop has met, exceeded, or fell slightly below expectations. So I hope you will find this video interesting. First of all, let me show you the laptop's case. Alright, so first of all, you can see over here on the laptop's backside, it's quite nice, quite sleek. Of course, you may also notice how it handled various tasks. It became a bit dusty during this time, but not too much. It's also important to note how it behaves because the laptop's cooling system is important. So this is one of the reasons for which I decided not to make too much interventions. Of course, it was previously dusted some weeks ago, so it's not necessarily a lot of dust, but still the laptop attracts dust, so this is what you can expect. Over here you can see your typical USB ports. I have to say, first of all, that in terms of configuration, this laptop doesn't fare as well as you may be expecting. Of course, I knew all these details in advance, so it wasn't really a surprise for me what happened in terms of specifications of port selection and everything. But you have to keep in mind, for instance, that in the case of this laptop, you have only a single USB 3 port, and these two ports are USB 2. So this is already a disadvantage of this configuration. I don't see it as that important because ultimately you can buy an USB 3 hub. But I wanted to show to you the first detail you have to keep in mind, that you don't have so many USB 3 ports. Of course, we are talking about USB 3.2, but these are your plain USB 2 ports. Next, there are no ports on the front side, and on the left side you will quickly notice the audio jack, your micro SD port. Sorry, it's quite difficult to make a good focus when you are having such a large laptop, and your typical USB-C port, HDMI port, and standard USB 3 port, and the DC input. I have to say, and this is very important, the fact that the laptop cannot be powered or charged through the USB-C port. I think this is quite an inconvenience, especially when more and more laptops are starting to have this feature. However, I don't see it as overly bad in the case of a large laptop. In the case of smaller ones, I can see the case being quite serious because in that situation probably phone charger would be enough to power it. But in this case, since I also will show you the power adapter, it's quite clear that this is not such an issue. It's a 90 watt power adapter, so quite a high power one. I am not expecting it to be easily replaced with anything else. If you have a laptop that probably draws around 45 watts, then an USB-C power ability would be important. As you can probably guess over here, you have one of the cooling fans. Let me see, okay. And on the other side, you have the second cooling fan. In terms of cooling, I have to say that this laptop fares quite well. Even if it doesn't have a dedicated graphics adapter. On the other side, of course, if you are more into gaming, this particular configuration is not going to be suitable. On the other side, parts of the configuration are going to be entirely acceptable if you are focusing more on running specific applications, and this is the case that I'm mostly into. How does the laptop's case feel? I think it feels quite nice. Of course, you don't have to think about overly expensive cases and ones that are particularly built for business laptops or professional or the ones catering to the professional market. Even if the laptop is clearly a Vivobook Pro, it doesn't quite reach the same level of features you may expecting. Of course, the laptop's case is nothing bad. It's a plastic case. It's quite sturdy, but I'm not expecting it to survive very well some sort of shocks. So you have to pay attention to it. But I feel that it's quite good for what I'm mostly aiming with this laptop. And I will be telling you immediately what kind of expectations I have. But first of all, let me show you the laptop's power adapter. It's the typical 90 watt power adapter that is being supplied with the laptop. Nothing fancy over here. I think it handles quite well the tasks. It doesn't matter if you are running the laptop mostly on idle or using it quite intensively in games. The power adapter doesn't get overly hot. Of course, it gets warm. The same can be said about the laptop itself, but I think it handles pretty well. And you have the standard barrel power jack. Alright, so let's plug it in. Well, regarding the keyboard, because this is what you're going to see right now. The keyboard feels quite nice. It's a 15-inch laptop ultimately, so you also have the numerical keys. As you have probably guessed, the configuration includes an AMD Ryzen 7 processor. It's not the top of the line choice, but quite close to it. I have chosen a laptop that has the integrated graphics adapter because I wasn't particularly interested in playing games, or at least not demanding ones. So not having a dedicated graphics adapter was not in any sort of way a major letdown. The trackpad is very large, and I think it's one of the features that was quite well thought about with this laptop. It's smooth, it has quite a pleasant feel to it, the sensitivity is good, so I have nothing to complain over here. And in terms of feedback, I think it feels quite nice. It has separate clickable areas, so you can go and make a left or a right click. It feels quite nice. Of course, it's not the same level of comfort or feedback you find on older laptops that had separate buttons for left and right click, but I think it's fine. I don't see a major problem with this. My most important gripe is the sensitivity of the trackpad, and I think it's spot on in this area. I'm not expecting quite major problems because we had so many years of technological evolution and advancement that having a good trackpad is quite normal. In terms of other features, the keyboard. The keyboard feels nice. It may not be the best keyboard. I still think it's somewhat lacking compared with your best standards such as Lenovo keyboards, especially the Lenovo ThinkPad keyboards. Compared with other laptops, I think it's quite fine. I have seen some poorer keyboards on some laptop models, but this one I think it's offers quite a nice balance between a compact keyboard and one that is quite pleasant to use. So I don't see any major gripes. The feel of it is nice. It's not overly deep. It's mostly a shallow keyboard, but I think it handles it quite nicely. It's not a noisy keyboard by far, so this is perfect for an office, and I can clearly say that. On the other side, you have your typical keys. There are no special keys. In general, I avoid keyboards that have special keys because they don't feel that nice. They can be quite annoying in some circumstances because you may want to try and press one of the typical keyboard keys and you end up activating a separate function. So I don't think this one is an issue over here. But let me talk you about some of the even more important features of the laptop, and I think one of the most important reasons for a purchase. And in our case, this is pertaining to the screen. The screen is simply fabulous for one particular reason. That it's an OLED screen. It's one of the very few laptops that has an OLED screen. I have to say that in person, this laptop looks much better than you will see on the camera. What you see over here has a slightly purplish tint, of course, due to limitations of the camera. To me, it looks like quite a nice vivid blue. So you have to keep this in mind. Again, with reds. Over here, the red is quite intense. What you see on the camera is somewhat of a muted color. So you have to keep this in mind. This laptop has a fabulous screen, and it was one of the most important reasons for purchasing it. And I don't think in any way it falls behind in this area. Right now I'm using the laptop at quite a low brightness, so in order for you to see what are the levels, this is the lowest brightness level. It's okay if you are mostly spending time at night with a dim light. Typically you would use it at this brightness level if you have a moderately lit room. And you can get as high as this, which I think covers just about anything. If it goes a bit and it's blooming, you have to understand that this is not an issue with the screen but with the camera. I will show you how it looks if I'm letting the exposure unlocked, because in that case you can clearly see that just a moment, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Okay, and I will put again the exposure roughly at what you are expecting. So this is how it would typically look, but to me, to my eyes, I think it's closer to looking like this. It's very vivid, it looks fabulous. Unfortunately, I cannot show to you the true extent of its wonder. I'm trying to find settings that would make it look as nice as possible. This is somewhat close to what I'm seeing, but again, I cannot stress it enough. It's a fabulous screen. It's one of the most important reasons for which you can find this laptop as a wonderful machine to work with. Okay, right now I dial it again back so that we can see better how the screen looks. All right, so the screen has a resolution, has your typical Full HD resolution, 1920 by 1080, so it's nothing special in here. The contrast is simply extraordinary because, again, we are talking about an OLED screen. Color reproduction is very good. I have not used over here it's the standard setting. I have not fiddled too much with colors because I think it's very nice. I also have to say that this screen is calibrated, and it looks very nice. Let me show you on them as needed. All right, so all right, so let me tell you a bit about the configuration. This laptop doesn't have, and I guess you have probably seen over here, I have been showing you this picture in Task Manager just to understand how well it handles the memory and the configuration we are having over here. It's an 8-core laptop CPU. It's quite fast. It's not necessarily the fastest one there is. There is an even faster option that it's the Ryzen 9 CPU. Over here we are having the Ryzen 7. It's quite close to the max. It has 8 cores. It has very good performance. And I can clearly say that with no particular issue that I could probably find with it. In terms of memory, it has 8 gigabytes of memory. There is also another configuration that has 16 gigabytes of memory. And in here I'm already starting to have some slight disappointments. Of course, I knew what I bought. That's not the issue. The fact is that the Vivobook Pro line of laptops do not have user accessible memory sockets. All the memory is being soldered onto the main board, and this means that your laptop's upgradability is severely limited. And this is one of the sudden choices that I think were made due to the way in which Apple had driven the market, and I think it's one of the poorest outcomes you can think of, because not having the ability to max the memory, to increase it, ultimately I think it's one of the poorest design choices. It costs very little and it has most of the impact in terms of performance that you can have, because more memory means you can run applications faster, you can run applications that were not necessarily designed for the time in which the laptop was released on the market. So having more memory always is helpful. And I think that there are ways in which recalls can be handled, because this is again one of the issues some manufacturers have presented. And they say that okay, if you have only user installable memory, then the user may make some mistakes and the laptop recall would be in order, even if it's just due to the way in which the user has not placed well the RAM module, or used an incompatible one, and then you must take the device back into service and then get back to it. I think it's one of the poorest outcomes, or at least a poor way of handling it, because ultimately you can do what was previously done. Of course, I'm not particularly happy even with this choice of having soldered memory and a separate memory module, because in this case you cannot quite make the best use of the memory, but at least you have some way of upgrading it. For instance, if you solder 8 gigabytes of memory on the laptop's main board, you can add up to 16 gigabytes of memory, or 32. I don't know, something like that. Ultimately, you cannot put 32 gigabytes of memory. You reach only 24 because we have 16 gigabyte module and the ones on the main board. You could have placed just to separate memory modules, and you can leave all this decision to the user and just apply one when the laptop is being sold. I think this was the best solution. It has worked so well for tens of years. However, manufacturers recently have decided that this is not the best way to handle it, and they prefer to use soldered memory. And I could not get over that, so I had to make my statement over here. 8 gigabytes of memory is not bad. Here we are running Windows 11, so the memory usage is slightly higher than on Windows 10 installation. So we are already getting to see part of the problem with having so little memory available and not having any sort of choice of maximizing it. Of course, 4 gigabytes of memory and a good SSD drive are going to be enough to handle more memory. But in the case of most applications, you will quickly run out of memory with 8 gigabytes. 16 gigabytes would have been a better choice. Of course, it's much more expensive, and then you have other issues to contend with. Even that may not be the best choice on the long run, because there may be situations where you may find more memory to be required. And in general, more memory never can have a bad impact on performance. And I think it's one of the easy ways of making a laptop be useful at least 5 to 7 years. And this is my main gripe: not enough RAM. With the CPU, yes, it's much more difficult, because replaceable CPUs placed on sockets may seem a good choice. Unfortunately, there are so many issues with compatibility that ultimately using a particular CPU model is not going to be so easy. So this is why, in my experience, since I also replaced CPU modules, the benefits are quite limited when you are thinking about replacing a CPU you have initially installed on the laptop with an add-on. Of course, over here there are problems because there are so many different models. Compatibility may not be the best one. You may have to resort to BIOS updates, and even then the way in which the laptop works may not be great due to the limitations of cooling and so on. Ultimately, I still think that the choice of CPU is not as bad, and of course a replacement CPU would cost quite a lot on the other side, and of course its availability is going to be limited mostly to the timeline of the laptop. So 5 years in the future, probably you will still find some CPU modules, but not as readily as you could when the laptop was released. On the other side, with memory, you can find memory plentiful even some 7 years, 10 years after the moment a laptop was released. So you have a much better way of extending the usability of the laptop, even repurposing it for something else, or giving it to another person, and in that case it will handle everything just perfectly. So memory expandability, I think, is much more important than CPU choice. Okay, regarding the storage, I think over here we are having a Hynix SSD, a PCI Express M2 non-volatile memory extension. It works quite fine. You can have, as far as I can tell right now, only a single configuration that has only 512 gigabytes. I think this is slightly unpleasant, because ultimately there are always persons that require 1 or 2 terabytes of storage, but I don't see it as difficult, since the internal storage can be replaced quite easily. You just have to unscrew the back cover, and then you can replace the SSD. So it's not bad. It may not have the best performance. We are going also to see how it fares. But I think it's not bad in itself. Not necessarily the fastest one, not necessarily the lowest performance. However, it's good that you have this choice. Of course, with a 15-inch laptop, I still cannot quite understand why you don't have two storage slots, because clearly the main board can accommodate two storage modules. But this is the choice the manufacturer has made. In general, you can think of the dual storage solution as being more of a pro feature, but again, we are talking about a pro laptop, this might not be such a small issue in the end and so difficult to handle. Yet this was the decision the manufacturer has made. However, thinking about the future, I'm pretty sure that 8 terabyte modules are going to be available. So this is going to mitigate the issues we're having with storage. I also have to say something about the screen and how it looks on the camera again. You may notice it has a certain flicker to it. Part of this effect is due to the camera not being perfectly in sync with the laptop screen. Yes, I made various attempts at making the screen slightly better looking, but I have not found a way to do so. So sorry for the interruption. All right. Regarding the port selection, I already mentioned that you have only two USB 2 ports, which could have been USB 3 ports with no issue, I think. But however, this was the choice we have seen. And two USB 3.2 ports. One of them is Type A, so you can place just about any device in it, and the other one is Type C. We also have an HDMI port. I have shown to you on the right side of the laptop. It's a 1.4 protocol standard HDMI port. It's quite fine. I think you can use it quite well with most displays. You have also an audio jack. It's a fine addition, nothing to be let's say complaining about. And then micro SD card reader, I think it's quite useful, although it's not as important as you may consider. One of the other gripes I have with the laptop is the poor choice of the integrated web camera. I think this is an issue with more laptops. I still see it as a very bad design choice to not have even a full HD camera integrated, especially when you have much better cameras even on cheap phones. So having a better camera on a laptop, especially taking into consideration the requirements of some video conferences, and again the fact that the cost is not really an issue. I think that a better camera costs less than $5, so it's a moot point in trying to say that it's a very difficult cost. You also have a privacy lock, which I think is very nice. On the other side, the camera quality is quite poor, mostly what you expect, since it's not even a full HD camera. So I'm not going to mention too much in this situation. The laptop also has integrated speakers. I will try and see if I can run something so that you can have a better understanding of the performance. Yes, I have to get over here. No, not interesting about running YouTube Premium. Let's see, I will try and see one of my videos, not because I want to make a show of it, but because I want to. Today we are looking at the Siemens Nixdorf PCD 4ND laptop. I think that the audio quality is quite fine. I will not show you a musical tune running because I don't think that's a great choice, and let's say that I want to show you other important things. I think it runs quite well. No major things to complain about. Of course, the audio quality is quite limited. We have the same stereo downfiring speakers that are almost at the edge of the laptop, so they don't have that much space to propagate sound. They are quite okay. It's already mentioned that the laptop has Harman Kardon audio tuning, which goes on to show that yes, it's a good laptop in this respect. It's a good multimedia laptop. It's not the best one I have heard, but it's quite difficult on a laptop to cover all of these major requirements. All right, let's get back to the specifications. The battery, it's a 63 watt hour battery. It's a free cell lithium ion battery. I think this is one of the most important disappointments I have, that the battery that is already supplied with the laptop doesn't have quite enough autonomy as you would expect. The laptop still uses quite a lot of power, both for the screen and for the internal CPU, especially when you're stressing it in applications such as games, or you are using other creative applications, like, I don't know, you're editing videos or something else. I'm not expecting to have a very good autonomy in this case, but even when you're lightly browsing, in my experience, the laptop doesn't quite have more than 6 or 7 hours of autonomy, and especially when we are thinking about today's capabilities of batteries, I still think that supplying one with such a low capacity is not that great. But ultimately, yes, you have to understand again, especially with this configuration that is almost the top one. It's quite difficult to be able to have very good long running times. Unfortunately, we have to accept this fact. It's mostly from my expectations, and I don't think they have been that far off. It's a very good desktop replacement system. Of course, the video chipset is quite dated. Even if you use the best dedicated video chipset, the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3050, even then you're going to feel that it's not necessarily the top of the line choice for a laptop. There are much better video chipsets that could be used. However, this is mostly a mid-range choice. So ultimately, it's a desktop replacement, especially if you don't require very powerful graphics. If you require powerful graphic support, 3D acceleration, then no, this laptop isn't for you. All right, I mentioned the OLED screen. One of the most important advantages of an OLED screen, despite or in spite of the obvious contrast ratio that is absolutely fabulous, just about any pixel is independently turned on or off, is the very good response time. Sometimes you may not think about this too seriously, especially if you're not a gamer. If you are a gamer, however, this is quite important, because any sort of LCD screen not only has a limited response time that is, of course, multiple times this value. It's not really consistent in the sense of being slightly better when not very many changes happen in the scene. You have to understand that most LCD screens have a response time being considered from gray to gray, and this is not necessarily the worst case scenario. It would be from black to white, because then any sort of lag that occurs, either due to the way in which the display is switched on and off, or the way in which the internal parts of the display are going to respond to that request makes it that the typical response time is much higher than what the manufacturer states, especially due to these circumstances. And you also have some sort of ghosting effect. Of course, those are very minimal, and most modern LCD screens have reduced this tremendously, but still there is a case of not having enough of this capability. And I really hope that OLED screens will be even cheaper and much more easily available, because whether you are talking about a TV, you're talking about your typical display, or ones that are included in just about any sort of device like a mobile phone, and, a laptop, or anywhere else, you have a massive improvement when you are having an OLED screen. Of course, OLED screens also have some pitfalls, and one of them is consumption that is quite a bit higher than your typical LCD screen. And also the fact that they have the potential to manifest burn-in, which means that if you run the display at high brightness levels, and there are parts of the interface that are constantly being shown, there is going to be some degradation on the area that has all this information, or all of these pixels that do not change too much in terms of color intensity. For instance, you can think about the taskbar and the clock areas being most likely to have these effects. But if you run an application that has many hours of showing you the same buttons on the screen, you may be noticing this sort of burning damage. Of course, this happens mostly in years, so 4 or 5 years down the line, especially if the brightness is at high levels. So you have to contend with some of these disadvantages when you're using an OLED screen. Another very important thing I would like to mention is the fact that most OLED screens have quite a glossy finish. The surface that is closer to you is glossy, which means that it makes reflections very obvious, and it makes it quite annoying. And especially this is important in areas that are quite brightly lit. And this is something that you have to accept. So using an OLED screen is not a jack of all trades. You have to understand that there are some issues that you have to contend with, and there is no way of getting over them. The rest of the specifications, yes, it's HDR certified, which means that high dynamic range pictures are going to look very nice. Even those that are your typical web pictures are going to look very nice and vividly, as you can probably guess from how you see it over here. Even if, as I said, in person it looks much better. You have to experience an OLED screen, and especially one on a laptop, to truly appreciate it. And I don't think that price is really an issue in this case, even if we are talking about a laptop that costs obviously almost $700 or euro. So it's not a cheap laptop. You may find configurations that probably are slightly cheaper, I don't know, somewhere around $500 or euros, with the base configuration that is not even having your typical high performance Ryzen processors. It has only the basic ones, so you can expect roughly the same performance. Of course, there are also AMD processors that are being offered in this range with lower power usage. So if you like just a quieter laptop and you don't mind the lower performance, you can buy such models. Okay, what else is important regarding this laptop model? As mentioned over here, regarding the configuration, I think I just about covered everything I had in mind. Of course, I also have to say that the screen's edges are quite small, so the laptop feels very nice when you are working with it. You can concentrate on most of the screen. It's quite compact for a 15-inch screen, a 15.6 inches screen, so it's quite large in a sense. Yes, what was important to mention? The fact that it has Wi-Fi 6 capability, and I think this is very important because most of what you consider in terms of portability, especially when you obviously notice that you don't have an integrated Ethernet connection, means that the wireless connection is going to be essential. So providing not only a Bluetooth standard that is quite recent, 5, which is fine. The pre-requirements for Wi-Fi 6 or 802.11ax standard, because it's also known as that, is very important. So let me show you how this laptop handles such a task. I will mention also in the video's description what kind of router I am using. It's a Wi-Fi 6 router, so it should have very good performance. You have to always take into account these performance figures with a grain of salt, because ultimately it depends so much on where your laptop is being located. If there are major obstacles in between it and your router, if you have a fiber or a typical cable internet connection, and so many things that may be having an influence, even traffic on the network at that point in time. Over here we are talking about a laptop that is connected directly to the, not connected directly to the router. Of course, the router still has another converter that makes the necessary data conversion, actually the standard conversion between a fiber optic and a typical Ethernet cable. So there are already some minor performance slowdowns, but they are very minimal. You cannot have right now a router that can be supplied directly with a fiber connection, an optical fiber connection, and then use it to share a wireless network. So this is already important to note. It's impossible right now, but you have to take into account your entire network performance. Okay, how are these values? I think they are quite fine. Think about it. You have a connection, a gigabit connection that would probably reach around twice this value. I'm not entirely sure if you would have the same upload and download speed when you would get closer to the media converter, the one that gets from Ethernet to fiber optics standard, but I think that the value is quite fine, and it goes on to show that the laptop has a very good implementation. How far is the laptop from the router? It's a very good question. It's less than around 3 meters, I think, from the router, but of course there is a wall that separates it. It's not a concrete wall, it's mostly a brick wall, so the impact on performance is not going to be as high as it can be in a typical home. However, I think it handles it very well, and even if the distance is going to be higher, I don't see an issue. Of course, we are using the 5 gigahertz connection over here, because onto the gigahertz you obviously will not reach such values. I think that the ping value is very good, 2 milliseconds. Of course, this is due to the network. You cannot do too much in terms of what your network provider offers to you. So this is what you will typically have to contend with. All right, getting closer to something else I wanted to show to you. I think it's a good choice right now to run some tests, and I will be showing you immediately what I have in mind, and I hope you will enjoy what you are seeing. All right, so let me go over here. The first one could be one of the tests I have been using on older CPUs. I just want to show to you that it runs perfectly even in this situation. Of course, there are some gripes. It cannot it cannot determine the CPU model. This program has been released, I think, around yes, 2000s. I thought about 1999. So it's a highly outdated program. However, it goes on to show very well the performance of modern computers compared with previous technologies, and it's fantastic how fast processors got to be today, and this whole evolution. Of course, those are processors that were released around the 2000s. Alright, I will even show this one just to have a way of easily thinking about the performance. On a typical computer, this would, of the 2000, such a test would take around 1 to 5 seconds depending on performance. So you can readily see how much performance we have with modern processors, and this still of course is not enough for our demand for high quality content. But I hope you had quite a good notion of what we are having over here. Of course, you can see also the chipset that is being used in the wireless LAN card. All right. This is another classical test that I was carrying on older laptops and computers ultimately. Of course, it doesn't support the full HD resolution. I think you can probably guess that such a resolution would be fine. This is a typical resolution you would use with such a test, and most of the laptops I have been using have been tested with this. Of course, it's benchmark that I think was released around the 2000s, so again quite the early 2000s, quite an old benchmark. But I wanted to show to you exactly, of course, how well also the screen looks. You have to think again, I should be running 3D Mark 2015 or an even newer version. I should be running other tests. But I wanted just to show to you how good the screen looks, and you can mostly understand if you are looking at these tests. And of course the fact that it's not particularly stressful. I will also be running a modern benchmark, and I will have some comments on it because I also played some games, and you will clearly understand that the laptop has some strong points and some pitfalls that you have to contend with. But ultimately, I think it's quite a good balance. You have to understand that on all these tests, what matters the most is the fact that you have a very good screen quality. And I think this matters a lot in most situations, because the screen is the most frequently used asset of your laptop, and I cannot say enough how many good laptop configurations are mostly affected by very poor screens. And I think this is still unacceptable for the current day we are facing, but that's the situation. If you look closely, it's quite difficult to maintain such a screen with no dust on it. And I had to make this mention because it's sometimes not readily obvious the fact that this particular coating can attract quite well dust. I think that the last time I cleared the dust out of the screen was around 2 weeks ago. You have to understand all of these limitations, because with a screen that has so much contrast, you're going to readily see all of these details. And I Made the choice not necessarily due to not having enough wheel, because that is quite far from what I wanted. It's the idea of showing you precisely what kind of issues you will face when you are using the laptop on a longer enough period of time. And I don't think that this is a disappointment, but I wanted just to point out some issues. Of course, in darker scenes, you're going to notice it much more readily. There are some issues, of course, with compatibility, and I'm not going to have any sort of expectation to this, especially when we are talking about Windows 11. We are not even talking about Windows 10 that could have been used for running such benchmarks. And all of these issues are really moot. I wanted just to show to you that sometimes backwards compatibility is going to be affected, even if most of the features are going to be working just fine. What else can I say? You have already noticed how the laptop's fan speed has increased and decreased, and the amount of noise it creates. I'm pretty sure there are much better tests on the internet, and I'm not going to have any sort of assessment on that, other than the fact that pertaining to noise, I don't think it's a laptop that fares that bad. I have been experiencing laptops that are even better in this sense of having less noise when they are operating at full speed. Of course, right now we are not operating at full speed. I just wanted to show you this test because it will probably be roughly what you will be experiencing when working with certain programs. So the fans may be ramping up and down in speed depending on how much demand there is for a specific application and the processor usage. What else I have to mention? I think that the video card supports DirectX 12. This is not necessarily something you would have any sort of gripe upon. There are also some features that are missing. For instance, no modern support for ray tracing, or at least the ray tracing that is being used in games, because this is mostly a simplified way of ray tracing compared with your typical workstation graphics 3D design development, such as, I don't know, 3D Studio Max, Maya, and others that are well known in this area, Cinemax, and other such solutions. So even if it doesn't have this feature, which of course it's not necessarily available for most laptops, I don't see it as a major issue. Other than that, what is also important, how well the laptop handles audio input. I mean, if the recording is really up to the standard that Asus tried to convey, like having very good noise cancelling. I think that compared with other laptops, it has quite a good way of handling noise, and your voice is going to be heard quite well. However, it's quite far from having even mid-range microphones that you could be using for games or for other situations, because it's going to have some sort of background noise that is going to be picked, and there is nothing that could be done regarding this situation. On the other side, I still think that for a complete laptop configuration is not a bad outcome. Of course, it could have been better. I'm pretty sure that some tablets fare much better, some laptops even are having much improved performance in let's say audio recording. However, again, it's a laptop that is not necessarily catering to such purposes. I still think that in terms of audio and video recording, my major complaint is about the integrated video camera. You can clearly see it that on Surface, Microsoft Surface laptops and devices, that it's quite easy to have a good camera, and I still think that most laptop manufacturers would have to step up the game in this area, even for models that are not necessarily top of the line. They don't cater particularly to the highly mobile users, the ones that prefer laptops that are highly compact. I think that even standard laptop, business laptops, should have a better camera, because a better camera can be used not only for video conferences. In the long run, it can be used for probably various other screen compositing purposes, and I think this is one of the most important abilities that should be able to be used in the future. I don't have too many examples to think of, but taking into account chroma keying that could be done so easily with a video camera and a good software, if you would have a better camera output, and especially ones that are not particularly for very well lit scenes, but ones that are for poorly lit ones, because the poor light performance is going to be not as impossible to think about in certain situations. Okay, let's talk about the results. The processor clearly fares very well in this area. The fill rate is not bad, but again, we have to think about very old software. So I don't think it's a good example. On the other side, there is a test that offers a very good detail pertaining to performance. If you look at Scene 4, it's a video RAM test, and Scene 4 is not having a very good performance. Of course, there are some explosions that you have seen over here, and the fill rate in this situation is quite a lot affected. The frames per second speed, and I think that the performance over here, even if when we are talking about very old discrete graphics cards such as this one that was released I think around the 2000s, goes on to show that an integrated video chipset is still far in terms of performance. I know that both AMD and Intel have made major progress in integrated video chipsets, but the way in which such a test is being run still today goes on to show that the access to video RAM is still not as fast as it could be. And there are many situations where you could be having the same issue with performance, especially in first-person shooters. And I still think that this is a very bad situation. Probably integrating a dedicated memory to the video chipset would be even better than just having it forced to access the separate system memory. Of course, as we are moving towards a system on a chip solution and more integration will happen, probably the video chipset performance will increase tremendously as more memory is going to be available directly on the chip, and in that case I can readily expect the performance to double, triple, or even reach a tenfold increase due to this capability. On the other side, the graphics chipset is not having a very poor performance, but then again, the access to memory is still the biggest issue on integrated chipsets. Of course, this is going to be solved as time goes on, but I still wanted to show to you that even an old test can still show some issues with integrated video chipsets. And I'm pretty sure that the Intel Iris solution, even if it has dedicated memory, is not going to fare very well in this area. Probably it will have much more performance than this very old dedicated video cards, but it's not going to reach the full extent of potential it may have with a very tightly need configuration. Again, these are my assumptions. They may be entirely wrong. I don't have an Intel Iris chipset to test, and will not probably do so for the near future. But I think that my expectation is not that far off. So better performance with the integrated memory and video chipset solution that Intel provides probably will lead to better performance, but I'm not expecting it to be massively improving the situation, at least for the time being. Of course, in the future, things may go quite far, because we have to understand the fact that even playing on a laptop with such a performance right now was unheard of and impossible to grasp in the early 2000s. But this goes on to show that there is still a lag between desktop and mobile performance, even if in terms of CPU performance, I think we got quite far with the one that could be available on laptops. All right. Let me show you the next test I wanted to have, and that is the storage performance one. Okay, let's run the test. Yes, there are two partitions over here. You don't have to think too much about the configuration, because ultimately is the same one on all laptops. They all have these 512 gigabyte storage size. I have created two partitions because I wanted to have a separate one for the system and the one for data and the rest of the things I'm storing on the laptop. I'm pretty sure it's going to have some sort of performance impact, that I have not used a single partition, and that probably I have not used the best cluster size for the partition I created, but ultimately the performance is not going to be that much affected. We have to put things into context also over here. I think that modern SSD storage units reach over 5,000 megabytes per second on the sequential tests, and on the random access tests, I think they are faring much better than this. So if you have the intention of replacing the integrated storage sometime in the future, I think it's quite a good choice. Also, you have to take into account degradation, especially if you use the laptop for a lot of software, and you make a lot of writes. I don't know, you're editing video on the laptop, then probably in less than 1 or 2 years you may be faced with either not enough storage, or even quicker than that, either not enough storage, or a storage performance that you think might be improved. And in this case, you can clearly see that the performance is quite low. Again, we are not talking about a high performance storage solution, one that is mostly mid-range. You can probably guess that it's not that far off from a typical SSD drive. So it doesn't fully make the best use of the PCI Express connection. If you're thinking that the laptop could be made faster even without memory, then clearly the storage replacement is your best bet, because ultimately when you don't have enough RAM available, you would have to resort to virtual memory, and then any sort of slowdown that occurs due to the reads and writes on the SSD drive are going to matter even more. All right, we are going to get closer to the end of the test quite soon. What also I would like to mention, I think that the way in which the laptop is being configured is quite fine. I don't have major gripes about it. Perhaps in the sense of choosing your brightness level, there should have been more options, because as you can see, the jumps are quite steep, and there are some LCD equipped LCD display laptops that have much more brightness levels, and I think this is much more suitable for the end user. It's not a major complaint, but still I think that the situation could have been improved slightly in this way. Pertaining again to the way in which the laptop handled those 5 months of use, I think it was quite a good choice, and I will tell you right now what were my expectations regarding the performance. I wanted to have a laptop that was a good desktop replacement. I thought about having good video editing capabilities, and in that case having multiple cores was a requirement. As you can see over here, the values are not that great, but I think you got the idea. All right. Right now you can see sequential tests and random tests with a larger quake and with a smaller quake. So more consecutive requests are being made, less consecutive requests are being made for all these tests. The first one is with longer quake, so more demands, and less demands. You can see quite well how the performance is being handled. Okay, so getting back to what I wanted to say. First of all, I thought a lot about video editing, and video editing, due to the way in which it works, just like with 3D design and mostly rendering, is a task that is very well split between processor cores. So this means that when you want to have a very good way of editing video, you may need to have as many processors as possible, and of course each of these cores should be as fast as possible. So we are getting back to this test data I had. We are talking about the Ryzen 7 processor. You may not be noticing over here the benchmark result, PassMark CPU mark in benchmarks, and this is the result in points. This pertains mostly to tasks that are let's say multi-core favorable, so they can run very well if you have more parallel processing power. The Intel choices are not necessarily the best, and I show to you what could have been a choice that Asus could have made, but of course they didn't. And in that situation, probably performance would be quite close for the top of the line Intel and AMD model. I'm not having any gripe that the Intel Core i9 was not available. I'm just saying that Intel and AMD could have probably the same performance, although I highly doubt that the Intel thermal design power is stated as it should be. As far as I can tell, Intel processors have some sort of drawing more power than what is obviously over here. Of course, this happens also for AMD, but the Intel TDP numbers have been shown in most benchmarks as being further off from what Intel has stated. And of course, this hides the fact that processor performance cannot increase that much with the limitations of power. So you have to be very creative in how you're going to present potential performance to the user. So this is what happens. All right, and of course, integrated video chipset have lower power requirements. The dedicated video cards have higher power requirements, so your power adapter is going to get even hotter when you're having a dedicated video chipset on the laptop. Of course, you cannot put it, you have to specify it from the start. You bought one with a dedicated video chipset, then probably the power draw will be higher. One that has only the integrated choice is going to have lower draw. Of course, you can switch on and off the dedicated video chipset, so you have also this ability of better using the power that you have available, or choosing performance over silence, or performance over longer battery time. So these are entirely options that are made available, of course. So I have shown to you part of what I wanted. This is a modern test that we will be having. I think that the PassMark performance test is a very good assessment of that technology because it uses a mix of tests that also cater to 2D performance as well as 3D performance. So in most cases you will see quite well if your laptop is going to handle good or not a specific use scenario. Over here you can see around 800 frames per second. This value is not quite important, but in general, as a rough guideline, you should be striving for more than 1000 on a typical modern laptop. Okay, let's run the benchmark, and I will be having some sort of additional data I will be supplying to you as it goes on, especially taking into account the performance I have noticed. Alright, so getting back, I wanted to have a laptop that has a very good performance so that I could make video editing on it, and this was my main concern. I also wanted to have one with a very good screen because I frequently use image editing, and in that situation having very good contrast and very good ability of seeing any detail in an image was a major plus. Having a display that is certified or has a very good color reproduction was also important for the previously mentioned reasons. And I think that the OLED screen has fully lived up entirely to all expectations. However, there is a small mention I would like to have, not about the screen, I think something about the configuration. I'm not entirely sure what is the reason why the brightness can have sudden increases and decreases that can happen from time to time, even when the laptop is quite on the idle. I'm not sure if there is something about the firmware of the laptop that hasn't quite worked well or not. I have noticed this effect much more in the past, before some updates of drivers and firmware, and it seems right now to be much less obvious if there is still such a manifestation. But I wanted to show to you that yes, there were some small problems that occurred in the past. Another major issue I have seen, again not with the screen itself but with the way in which it is being controlled. I don't quite understand, of course it's not the first laptop at which I am seeing this, but I cannot quite understand why manufacturers do not offer direct support of brightness control beyond the operating system. When you're starting the laptop, the brightness is at full. I don't quite understand what is the point in having full brightness, especially when I have chosen a particular brightness level when I'm running an operating system. Even if I did not choose such a level, I still think that it would be great to set a brightness level higher or lower in those circumstances when you don't need. So if you're navigating the BIOS or doing something else, you still have to accept the fact that it's running with full brightness. And I don't think this is good for the display, and as well is not good for your eyes. However, this is the way in which the situation is being handled. So I wanted also to mention this. In this test, yes, we can see first one of the first benchmarks of performance. It's already running quite low in terms of performance, not low for this laptop, but low compared with other computers. And even here I think this is the best test you can have. A very good graphics chipset with high performance would reach over 20 to 30 frames per second, and this goes on to show in that particular area when the when the trees are being displayed, just as you can see over here that the graphics chipset has major performance limitations. So just about any sort of modern 3D game, whether it's racing, first-person shooter or anything else, is going to have quite a low performance. And I got to choose between having better performance but also having a noisier system, and one that was relatively tamer but had good processor performance. And in this case, as I said, I chose the integrated chipset. It may not have been the best choice, I'm pretty sure, but ultimately this is what we are seeing today. Something else related to use. Well, I think that the laptop handled quite well situations where you have to reach a good enough performance, especially in video editing. So if you're editing full HD video, you can expect probably to have a performance that is roughly in line with your typical desktop workstation with a lot lower CPU usage. Of course, I'm not talking about the top of the line workstation. I'm talking mostly about an entry level one, but this is enough because it's far above some laptop performance that you can probably experience with your typical low power or compact laptops. So it's in line with expectations. So if you edit high definition content, I think that choosing the top of the line processor or choosing the one immediately below, as I have done, is going to be very helpful. To have a rough understanding, if you're editing full HD video, you can probably expect to have 2 times or roughly half the time, because this is a better way to say it, half the recording time, or even less required for outputting your video. So this may make video editing quite decent, not taking into account, of course, a full a high performance laptop, but taking into account one that can readily be used for other purposes as well, and as I said, one that is not over $1,000. So for a laptop that probably is going to be sold at $700, 700 euros, around these values. Of course, they may be lower depending on the configuration and when you are going to purchase it. I think it handles it quite well. Other facts about the way in which it's used and expectations. I think without taking into account benchmarks, I had slightly higher expectations for the 3D graphics performance. I have seen some tests and I was expecting things to be slightly better, but of course integrated video is again the issue. I think that even in some reviews I have noticed on the web, testers were complaining about even the performance of the dedicated graphics chipset, because of course it's a mid-range graphics chipset, it's not a top of the line. Even when you're talking about the integrated graphics card, it's an NVIDIA RTX video chipset, RTX 3050, but still the performance is far from your typical expectations for modern laptops. I mean that if you want to have good performance, then this chipset is not the best choice. It's obviously much better than all integrated video chipset, but it's not that far off from them. Alright, regarding the CPU mark, you may have noticed that I wrote around 20,000 points, and in this PassMark test the performance was roughly 17,000. It's not that far off. I'm pretty sure something may be slightly dragging lower the performance, but I don't see it as that far off. Of course, the 3D graphics performance is the lowest one, and it's obviously much lower than you would typically expect with such a high performance processor, but as mentioned, this is the current situation. It's a laptop mostly catering to the use scenario I thought about. I don't know exactly how much the RTX 3050 performance would be, but however, let me try to make an attempt at seeing how this information might be handling. Okay, let's see, video card benchmarks. I think we will probably have quite an easy task in front of us. 3050. I think this is the performance. 3060 laptop. Yes, I think this one is quite close. Let me see if I find a better. Yes, 3000 titanium. I think this is the performance you will typically expect. So 9,000 points, and this integrated video chipset reached just 1,700, so almost 2,000 points. It's a very large gap that you will see in terms of performance. So it's quite clearly a limited video chipset, but I wanted to show to you exactly how big of a difference it is. And if we are talking about the performance of the processor, you can see over 21,000, so 17,000. Probably it could be affected by the operating system. We are talking about Windows 10 versus Windows 11, what we are running over here. I think they run in Windows 10. There are also some applications that have been installed, so I'm not expecting the performance of the system to be quite close to what a typical clean installation would be, but I wanted to show to you exactly how a typical system would behave, and this is the reason I chose such a way of presenting information. So ultimately, after you have seen those tests, I think you can have quite a good understanding of the laptop. So trying to get closer to the end and to the conclusions. Will or would I recommend such a laptop? Clearly. But first of all, you have to think very carefully about what your most important goals are. If you are going to do most of what I am doing here, so video and graphics editing, I think you can probably handle the situation with just 8 gigabytes of memory, so that's not an issue. You will probably make the best use of the processor if it's at least a Ryzen 7 one in this configuration and the one that has 8 cores. The same goes for video editing. However, if you want to play games, clearly you will have to think about the configuration that has the dedicated GeForce RTX video card. There is no way of sugarcoating it. Using the integrated video chipset, whether you are having the Intel or the AMD processor, is the worst way of expecting good performance. Next, regarding the memory, again, if you really want to get into gaming, 16 gigabytes is the absolute minimum. Unfortunately, you have to accept that more than 16 gigabytes is not going to be available. Also, regarding the screen, I'm pretty sure that Asus could have devised a way of having also a higher resolution screen, even in this 16:9 format. And I think it would have been a good choice, especially when you're having the dedicated graphics chipset, because clearly that one would have a much higher fill rate and it would probably offer better performance. So having a 4K screen on this laptop, I don't think it was that far off. However, I'm not having major complaints even about the full HD screen. It's just a bit off when you are thinking about the full configuration of the laptop, the top of the line one that has dedicated graphics. For the integrated graphics, clearly having more than full HD resolution is just a drag, because as you have noticed, performance is not that great either. And especially memory access is going to be the issue over here. Next, the integrated wireless card. Very good performance. I have been using it again, as I mentioned, for 5 months, and it had consistent performance. I can clearly say that whether you are closer or farther from the router is not going to have as much impact as on previous generation Wi-Fi cards, though I have to say that I have not used enough of them in the sense of having enough models with Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 5 and using them in all sorts of circumstances to really draw a conclusion if there is a clear improvement with the model that Asus decided to include with this laptop, or just about any wireless card behaves well. But in the sense I mentioned, it behaves well for the purpose we have. The next issue, ports, yes, it's a disappointment. Having just one or two USB-A ports is not enough for a laptop with these capabilities. A 15-inch laptop should have had 3 USB 3 ports. Whether you could use them at USB 3 speeds or USB 2 speeds, it doesn't matter. Of course, I used over here the standard USB 3, whether we are talking about USB 3.2 or USB 3 performance, but I still think that USB 3 performance is entirely achievable with 3 ports. Why Asus made such a design decision is entirely unknown to me. Another fact that I mentioned, the integrated battery. I still think that a 3-cell battery is a bad choice for such a laptop. But this is the choice Asus had made. Having more autonomy, I think, would have been very good for such a laptop. Unfortunately, this is the situation. We don't have too much to say about that. Audio capability, good, not necessarily the best you will find, but not bad for a laptop, clearly, and not for one in this price range. The integrated video camera, as mentioned, is simply awful for a laptop that was released in 2021. There is no way to sugarcoat it. The camera is just bad. Of course, it may be enough for video conferences, but again, you have to think about expectations. Just about any sort of, and cost, ultimately, just about any mobile phone has a better camera than this laptop. And most laptops have at least a camera that performs as well as this one. Some laptops even have been having Full HD integrated webcams for quite a while, so it's nothing too much to ask of to have a good camera. Of course, Asus also releases the Pro X line of laptops that has slightly higher specifications. They offer more performance and they offer a different screen. I think it's a 3x2 screen. So it's a bit taller than this, with, I don't know, by some centimeters. And it offers a very good experience, especially when you're thinking about graphics editing. On the other side, the performance is not as high as you may expect. I think it has a slightly better integrated video chipset, but not by much. The screen resolution is improved. I don't remember exactly by how much, but if I were to fancy a guess, let me think. So 16x OLED. You may have noticed one of the results, great screen, poor performance. So I'm pretty sure this is one of the issues we are having. Yes, unfortunately the same video chipset that is quite slow in terms of performance, quite low in terms of performance. I'm not entirely sure if there are better processors available. To me, at least as a base model, it seems horrible. The same specifications as noticed you can have on the Pro model, not on the Pro X model. So on the Pro X model that has an even higher screen resolution, as you can see a 4K screen, I think is just a very bad choice to have these poor processors. Again, the same way of specifying onboard memory and not having any sort of additional upgrade capability. Of course, you can spec the top of the line one with 32 gigabytes, but I still think that with such a low processor, especially when you have to think about it, even if there are better processors available, or if there will be, I think it's a very bad choice for such a laptop that costs over $1,000 to have such a poor CPU choice. And the battery, yes, of course, is beefed up, which is fine, 6-cell battery. I don't know, perhaps they could have crammed a 9-cell battery, but ultimately that's how it is. Unfortunately, the port selection, the port selection is just as bad. So again, a laptop that bears the Pro moniker but doesn't have the features. Again, if you must have an OLED screen and you must have that screen format, I can clearly say so, but in terms of let's say best use of a specific amount of money, it's very, very poor. I still think that if you want the OLED screen, just get the cheapest Pro OLED model that will probably have the integrated Intel and Intel graphics and processor, and forgo anything else. If you need something that has more power like I did, then go with the Ryzen model that has enough CPU performance, or with the Intel model if Asus might release a model that has better performance in the future with a higher spec Intel CPU, but ultimately don't have very high expectations in terms of performance. Most of these laptops are still the same without saying too much. Okay, so I think that just about wraps it up. I still think it was a very good purchase choice. Possibly there would have been a better way of enjoying the system if I would have made the decision for the integrated video chipset not being as important and specifying the full dedicated graphics chipset solution. But ultimately, I don't mind it that much, and especially for the applications I'm running, so video editing, graphics editing, browsing, and occasionally some very non-demanding games, I still think it's great. And I left again at the end the OLED screen. I think this is the most important feature of this laptop. It's a great screen. You will be surprised, especially if you use laptops before, how much an OLED screen makes your experience much more enjoyable. Because no matter how good an LCD screen, it's not having the same display uniformity, it's not having the same display contrast, it's not having the same response time that an OLED screen has. Even if the OLED screen also has some issues pertaining to reliability and the way in which the coating, of course, is not particularly friendly towards brightly lit environments. But ultimately, if you are a content creator, then I will clearly make a recommendation for such a laptop, and I hope you will enjoy soon an OLED screen laptop. especially for this experience alone of seeing how important the screen is. And of course, the processing power could be much better, but ultimately you have to understand how much, and you have to press manufacturers, if possible, if you have this capability to release more OLED screen laptops. And if you want to buy one, if you're not going to have a major complaint about the processing speed, try to find one on the market with an OLED screen, because it's going to be a major leap in terms of comfort and quality and joy you will have in using such a laptop. So I hope you enjoyed the video. This just about wraps up everything I had considered up until now about saying about this model. I hope you found it interesting, and you didn't mind the fact that it was quite a lengthy video. So thank you very much for watching, and if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel, and also make sure to watch others that I will be releasing in the soon other videos. So thank you very much.